All right, ready? Okay, we're recording.
Okay. Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Critique Partners. My name is Lynne Schmidt, and I am the author of Gravity, as well as On Becoming a Role Model. I write nonfiction, young adult fiction, and poetry. And next up, we have Gabrielle Byron.
Hi, I'm Gabby Byrne, and I am I'm an author of middle grade fantasy, and my debut novel came out in 2019 with Macmillan. It's Rise of the Dragon Moon, and then my sophomore novel comes out in May, and it's called The Edge of Strange Hollow. So hopefully you'll check those out. And we're here to talk about what it is to be a critique partner and what that can look like and our experiences with that. Lynn and I have been critique partners for a very long time.
And I still can't say your last name correctly.
That's fine. There are things that are important and there are things that are not important. That's one of the not important things. And we actually met at PNWA.
Woo!
So I don't know how many years ago that was, Lynn, 5 or 6.
I think that was 2011. I think that was my first PNWA conference.
Yeah. And as I recall, I just came up to you and said hi.
Yep.
And that was how it started. And
so let's talk about first meeting. So obviously, with COVID, people aren't really meeting face to face. So
right.
Sometimes they might be able to meet electronically. Things I've definitely met people in places like Twitter, and just had a call of, I wrote a short story. Would anybody be willing to critique this? There are platforms and groups on Facebook that are good connection points. But face-to-face, Gabby and I met at PNWA, kind of just sat next to each other and said, oh, hey, here's what I'm writing about. Would you be interested in reading this? And so, Gabby, if you want to speak a little bit more towards that and how that went for you.
I mean, it was a pretty just frank conversation. I think, you can get to know people face-to-face. Obviously, if you have friends that write, that's a great option. Or if you're part of an in-person writing group, that's a great option. Like Lynn said, there are a ton of ways to meet people online, whether that's through groups like PNWA or the SCBWI, or even online conferences. A lot of conferences have gone online and have different kinds of forums where you can talk with people and meet them. And then once you've met somebody and spent a little time with them, whether it's in person or online, then you get to a place where you just kind of have to say, hey, I'm working on this, or it's really cool you're working on that. Do you need some extra eyes on that? I'd love to critique for you. Or do you think you'd be interested and have time to critique for me? And that's just kind of the place you have to get to start that conversation.
And I think it's really important to be transparent about what you're looking for with those critiques.
Yeah.
I have had people where I'm just like, I really just need the first 30 pages looked at. Would you be willing to do this? I've also actually had one-sided critiques where I've critiqued for people and they haven't been able to critique for me. And so, make sure those expectations are up front right away. Are we swapping? Is it just one-sided? Do you want payment? There are some critique partners who are interested in payment. I am too poor to be able to afford that. And so that's just not an expectation that I've ever had of a critique partner.
And usually the folks that want to be paid are, they have sort of critique editorial sites online, like they've set themselves up as businesses. And so I think in a lot of ways, they would be leading with that. I would hope they would be leading with that.
Right.
Right. So, yeah. And I think it might even be a good practice to just say, we've never critiqued for each other before. Let's just swap first chapters, or let's swap, a few pages. And that might give you an opportunity to see what kind of chemistry there is between you, because critique partners have chemistry or don't, as the case may be. And that makes a big difference, right? We had
Yeah.
great chemistry.
I absolutely loved everything you ever sent me. And I was honestly, you were probably my only critique partner who every time you sent me something, I was like, oh, yay. And I think that's actually really something to mention as well, is that sometimes the chemistry just isn't there. Sometimes the expectations for writing isn't there. And being able to talk to your critique partner about, okay, at what point do we call it as well? Because it's always okay to say, I was hoping this manuscript would be better developed. And I think, this could use a lot of work and a lot of edits. Here's what I'm seeing were some things that could use a little bit more editing or a little bit more improvement, but I would definitely be willing, or even I would not be willing to take a second look at this. Agents aren't the only ones who say no. Sometimes beta readers and critique partners say no as well. And that's important to know.
Yep. I mean, enjoyment of writing is subjective, right? We have all heard that. You hear it on the agent hunt, you hear it on the editorial hunt. And it's true for critique partners too. There are some folks whose writing I absolutely adore, but who I can't critique for.
Yep.
And there are some people who really love my writing that can't critique for me. And part of that is about, having the energy for a book, right? Is having like the right amount of ability to help that person. And to that, you sort of have to be at the same level, to the extent that, you don't have to both be published, or you don't have to both have an agent, or you don't have to both, write the same things even, but you have to both have the same amount of energy to give to the work. I think is the bottom line for, in my experience.
Yeah. And let's, if it's okay, transitioning to times we've had to step back from critique partners. I met a wonderful woman at PNWA in 2018. Actually, we met in the liquor line. We were both memoirists, and we talked about our projects. And so, at this point, we'd had a lot of different critique partners, and fortunately had a little bit more of a jading system. And so we said, let's swap the first chapter, see how the writing is, and see if we want to move forward with each other. And we checked in each chapter after that. And I was actually the first one to say, I'm seeing a lot of the same issues throughout this. I've actually gotten to the point I was color coding some of the issues. So a lot of the things I was seeing were starting with too many I statements. So I went out to my car, I got out of my car, I went shopping, and you can say at the grocery store and things like that to really show those transitions. And so I started highlighting a lot of these issues that were really apparent to me. And so I sent it back and I said, I think at this point I'll need to stop. If you can go forward and edit these issues that I'm seeing that are recurring, I would absolutely love to take another pass at it. But until then, I'm editing the same things continuously. So that was one of my critique partners where it was really heartbreaking, especially because with memoir, it's so much more personal. And I think those critiques are even harder to both give and receive. With young adult or something that's fiction, this isn't real life. This isn't, it's an adventure. It can be fun. It can be jarring. But with memoir, it's saying, here's your story and I need this to be better to want to continue. And that can be really, really difficult. And so Gabby, what are some instances you've experienced?
Yeah, well, I think a really important one is when you're giving somebody feedback, it's a little bit of a spin-off of what you're saying, actually. You're giving somebody feedback and they aren't receptive to that feedback. And by receptive, I don't mean like, yes, you're absolutely right. These are all things that need to change and I'll change them right away, boss. That's not it at all. But recognizing that the person you're working with is doing what they can to make your book better, right? They're giving their honest opinion, which can be really difficult sometimes, right? It takes time, it takes energy. It can really take quite a lot of thought. And it can sometimes be news that's difficult to deliver. And if you care about that person, if you've developed a relationship with them, that can be difficult. So just when someone is receiving feedback, to be open to that in the sense that you say, okay, I really appreciate all the time and energy you spent on this. I'm really going to take some time and consider this.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going to give you the same thing back again, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm not going to say, thanks for your time, thanks for reading, and here's the fixed chapter, which is 4 words different than the original, and now is it okay?
Yeah.
So I mean, and that's a form of active listening, I guess. So I think that active listening property in a critique partner is a really important one, and I've definitely had to step away from some critique partners who weren't receptive, or who were really, really offended or pushed back on critique.
Yeah.
And those are sort of part and parcel of the same response. But other reasons I've had to walk away was just, I think, needing something different. If you have a set relationship with your critique partner, so, I have 2 or 3 people that I critique for, and that whom critique for me regularly. But sometimes I need something totally different, right? And sometimes I might go outside my genre, or just outside my comfort zone, right? Outside my friend group that I've developed over the years, to get a different perspective. And I think that can be really valuable, even if it's not what you're used to.
Mm-hmm. And I think being on the receiving end of the critique relationship, both with young adult and with memoir, again, receiving feedback can be incredibly difficult. And I would always encourage writers to go through and read the whole edit. Just read it and remind yourself it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be upset, and it's okay to think. Don't tell your critique partner this, but it's okay to think that they don't know what they're talking about. So always do that first read through and let all of your feelings, whatever they are, just be there, but then come back to it, an hour later, 2 hours later, sometimes even as late as the next day, depending on how intense those feelings are. Because even with my poetry, I've actually had one of my poetry critiquers make me cry. And I took probably about a week away from it because I was like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But he's not saying these things to hurt me. He's saying these things to help my poetry, to edit these pieces. And when I went back to it, it was brilliant feedback. It really, really was. It was just, I was too invested in them to give it the consideration. So I would always encourage that first read through, brace yourself for whatever those feelings are going to be, and then to come back to it.
I actually think I think there should be like an institutionalized multiple day break.
Yes.
Between getting any kind of feedback, whether it's from a critique partner or an editor or an agent, whatever. There should be, an enforceable, a self-enforceable couple of days where you don't have to say anything, but thanks so much for the time that you put into this. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to reading the notes, right? Yeah. And you just leave it at that. And then you read the notes, and depending on how heartbroken you feel, because it's always work, right? We always think, I'm going to send out this book and this person loves me and they're going to be like, this is the best thing you've ever written. It needs nothing. There is nothing else you have to do to this book. It's done, baby. It's done, right? And that never happens. It's not a thing. It's not a reality ever, because you're asking for improvement, right? And they're going to give you improvement. So, depending on how heartbreaking it is and how real it feels, right? Sometimes I think the more real it is, the worse it feels. If it's not good news. Then you need to take a break, right? You walk away and you sort of process it. It's like making a soup or something. You just have to let it simmer for a little while and kind of, become what it needs to settle in and become what it needs to be before you can process it and apply it. And you want to react first.
One of the areas that I found really helpful to me, both being a critiquer and the person being critiqued, is the people always ending or even starting the email with, I really liked this piece. here's what I liked about it. You'll see my notes below, or you'll see my notes in line, or with that fancy little like critique bubble, however those work. Sometimes technology's too fancy for me. But really, you know, taking the time to say, because even in pieces that need a lot of development, there can still be something good to take out of it.
Right.
And finding that piece and really reminding the writer, you know, there are things I liked in this. Here's what they are, and then here's what I think needed work. And then just always thanking the critique partner. Gabby, I can think one of your books that as the critiquer was really rough for me, to highlight an entire section and say, it's really hard for me to follow what's happening here. So I had to like skip these 3 paragraphs, but then here's where you brought me back. And then this writing was beautiful.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the Moira books.
Oh my gosh. Way back.
Yeah, way back when. But it was so hard to want to give you that feedback, because
Right.
everything had been so brilliant up until that point. And so I was like, how do I say that in a way where like it can be communicated and you could be receptive to it? And so recognizing that here's my friend who I'm reading for, here's this brilliant piece of work, and really being able to say that in a way, and also say, you know, let me know if you need help for like what I mean, or like why I'm getting lost. Like, please reach out to me, because I would love to explain this. And this again goes to boundary setting. How accessible do you want to be to your critique partners? Because do you want them to question all of your feedback? Do you want them to be like ask for clarity for a lot of it, or do you just want to say this is just one and done? Yeah. And so that's another expectation to clear up with people is how many rounds might we be doing this? Am I open to looking at this again? Or is it just here's what I've thought of this, and best of luck?
And those things might not be, you might not know them right up front, right? Those might be things that develop over time. But when you are in a relationship with a critique partners, or critique partners singular, or critique partners, boy, that's tough, plural,
Yeah.
you know, you're going to have to develop boundaries with those people, right? You know, when I was working on Rise of the Dragon Moon, there were a few times when I had to go back and sort of reset parts of the system that played into different chapters. And and to do that, I kept saying to critique partners, and I had quite a few of them for this particular book. And so I would, you know, shop out different chapters to different people, and then try and blend the critique. So they're, you know, you have to sort of figure out what works for each piece that you're working on and what you need. And that shifts. It doesn't always stay the same. Mm-hmm. But I think once you sort of settle into some stable relationships, then it becomes easier to navigate that. You start to understand it better as you go over time. And the more you write, of course, you know more what you need as well.
So Gabby, how many critique partners do you think is a good size for a finished product? How many passes through people should a book go through?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I have between 2 and 4 critique partners for each book that I write. And usually I have 2 of them that I shop out an early draft to. So it might even be before I send it out to my agent.
Okay.
And then depending on whether the book is purchased or not. So if, you know, for Edge of Strange Hollow, it went from my agent right to the publisher.
Oh, wow.
So it's because I had a relationship with my editor and deadlines. There were deadlines. So, you know, it only got to go through 1 round of critique, but it went through 2 or 3 people. But I think in an ideal world, when you're starting a novel, if you're not on a deadline already, you know, to do an early pass with a couple of people and a later pass with a couple of people. And they don't have to be the same people. And that probably is dependent partly on their time, and also partly on just whether you feel like you need a wider breadth of opinion and input. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I've got some critique partners that write middle grade and some that write young adult, because I write both. And I find that really helpful because the perspective really shifts quite a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, the MG crowd will spot a whole bunch of stuff that the YA crowd won't, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And I'm
And
sure that goes for different genres as well.
I was just going to say that. So, again, I write young adult memoir and poetry. And Gabby, you've edited my memoir, I think, a couple of times at this point.
Yeah.
And you know, coming from a standpoint of somebody who writes fiction versus nonfiction, Gabby had a phenomenal eye for, you know, this isn't really adding to the story. Why is this in here? You know, what are you really doing with this narrative, and asking me some of those questions that I hadn't really been able to ask myself, because here I was just word vomiting on the page and being like, oh, this terrible thing happened and I hate these people. And Gabby definitely would highlight it.
Anything of the kind.
Maybe a little more lengthy and more eloquently, but Gabby was definitely, what's that?
Lyrically.
Yeah. But Gabby was definitely able to point that out and say, you know, I understand why you as a person would want this in here, but for the sake of the book, I don't think this is helping the narrative. And so that's where I created a little like word dump document where at this point I've probably removed no less than 8 chapters out of my memoir, because between various critique partners, they were like, this scene doesn't need to be here. This is over explained. It's not really pushing things forward. And realistically, this chapter illustrates the scene a little bit better.
Right. Right.
And so again, the kill your darlings, you know, that I thought some of these chapters were just so important that clearly I wrote them, and now they just live in another universe.
Yeah, well, you just have them, you know, to access for a different part of a different book, right? Mm-hmm. Or to inform different characters even. Oh shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. All right, I was going to talk about just the different depths of editing, I guess I would say. Mm-hmm. And this isn't necessarily something that, you know, you have to sort of talk out with your critique partner, but it informs different ways that people edit, right? So Lynne was just talking about ways that she gave developmental edits, or ways that I gave developmental edits, which is, you know, really big, pretty sweeping changes. You know, kill off this side character, or, you know, this premise isn't really working, or, you know, even something like your timeline feels off because of the editing you've already done. So, you know, you've got, the sun is setting at the end of this chapter, and then it's afternoon at the beginning of the next chapter, you know, so there's like some things that you need to sort out there. And those developmental edits, you know, are the most time intensive probably for the author, but also really are part of shaping the story and super important for that reason. But then you also have line edits, which is, you know, when somebody goes through and says, oh, this sentence is beautiful, but it's really long and you lost me about halfway through, and maybe you can cut it up, or, you know, maybe you're using the word glared too many times. I don't know.
That's such a big one, where you just keep repeating the same word and you don't, like, you as the writer don't recognize it, but then your critique partner will totally be like, you've used this word 17 times on this page.
Does this person do anything else but glare? I don't think they do. Yeah, it happens with dialogue tags a lot. I've found, like, we fall into the habit of using the same dialogue tags. Instead of thinking through sort of the emotional connection to our physical bodies. What else do you got, Lynne?
So definitely the repeating in aspects. So where I said with one of my critique partners, I'd actually gotten to the point where I was color coding things of like, this is repeating, you know, and it's not even necessarily a single word that repeats, but sometimes it's a single action. So like I clenched my teeth together. If somebody is doing that a whole lot, that's something to look for. I'm trying to think of one that I use a lot because I know there's just so many that, so an example, I know I'm a big fan of using the word gently, and especially with poetry because, that it just kind of happens. And so that's something that I myself will flag in any document, whether it's a full manuscript or my poetry now, and it's a word that I actively try to move away from or have a thesaurus on the side to look at. But Gabby, do you want to speak to a little bit more of how your critique or your expectations of critique partners have started from when you first started writing to where you are now as a published author?
Yeah. I think when I first started, you were my very first editorial partner.
Yay!
So, and PNWA was my very first writing conference. So it really was a big shift over, I guess, 5 or 6 years now.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think I thought of critiquing as being a lot more like line edits.
Okay.
Like sentence level edits. And I think I quickly realized that wasn't the case, and that wasn't the most important stuff either. Mm-hmm. It's the deep dive into the character arc, and it's the dive into the plot line and the premise, and just the inherent stakes that you're trying to establish, mm-hmm. And whether that feels true and speaks to you as a reader. And those things are more ephemeral and more subjective. So it became a lot more about finding writers that were serious about their writing, right?
Yeah.
And that was sort of, I don't know, like not the very, very earliest stage of finding critique partners, because that was a lot opportunity, really, right? Bumping into you, finding that we were interesting to one another and setting up a critique, right? Yeah. That kind of how that rolled out. And then moving into a space where I really wanted that feedback and felt like I needed that feedback and wanted to be able to give feedback that was meaningful. And mm-hmm. that was, about finding people that were serious about their writing, and that weren't so far ahead that I wasn't able to learn, or that I was holding them back, and vice versa. Yeah. And that can be kind of tricky because there's a lot of gray area, I think, within all, the whole spectrum of writers, so again, it's not really necessarily about like whether you have another person who has an agent already or whether you have a person who's already published. I think it's much more about sort of the level of focus and your skill set, your craft level, to be able to engage at the same place with that person.
Yeah. And I definitely think, growth happens with writing. The more you write, the better you get. That happens across the board, whether it's young adult, middle grade, memoir, poetry, sci-fi, whatever. The more you write, the better you're going to get. And I think that holds true for critique partners as well.
Yeah, for sure.
It definitely, the more manuscripts I read from you, the more quickly I was able to get through them because I already knew what to expect from you. Right. I knew what to look for. Yep. And then we also had this way of communicating where we were just so receptive to each other. And so, even in the aspects where like my feelings were hurt. And I feel like realistically, every time I've ever gotten feedback, my feelings have always been hurt just because I really do want people to be like, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. So
it's nothing.
Yeah. And it can be really hard. But also just being able to also recognize when you've outgrown your critique partner, or if a manuscript isn't a good fit for that critique partner. So as Gabby and I have mentioned multiple times, we've been through multiple manuscripts of each other's, but here was The Rise of the Dragon Moon, which got a book deal, and I wasn't even involved in that. And so it was amazing as someone who had been a critique partner just to be cheering from the side. And so transitioning away from that and just knowing that, here's this writer I'm so incredibly proud of, and here's this huge accomplishment. And then also recognizing that I had no hand in this. And
You did, though. I mean, indirectly, right? Because we grow as a result of the relationships we have with the people who give us feedback. And
right,
so, it really does become an amazing foundational community, right? Of people who have read your stuff, whether they've read that particular piece that
yeah,
has whatever success, it really is, it's a self-feeding system, right?
right.
And it's an amazing thing to work with critique partners and to see them grow and succeed,
Mhm.
regardless of whether you're involved in whatever particular work moves forward, right? It's
Right.
super
Well, and
cool.
it's the lessons that are taught from each critique partner that can
Right.
carry forward. With some of my later manuscripts, I can almost point to a part where you didn't even edit it, but I edited it as though it was you looking through it because I knew the feedback that you would have given. And so that's what I'm talking about, where sometimes you just outgrow the critique partner because they're not necessary anymore. The things that they would have picked out, you've learned to pick them out yourself.
That's right. And if
Um,
you're really lucky, then that person has also like grown and shifted, and you've got a whole new set of problems.
yeah, yep, yeah,
So you've got, the lovely challenge of always growing, which is one of the best things about being a writer, because you're never done, you're never bored.
yep.
There's always ways to increase your craft and your skills.
And
So
I think you had spoken to this a little bit earlier of how you have kind of your group that's your first go-to group. I think every time I've gone through a revision, there's a couple of people who are my critique partners who I will definitely say, I've done substantial edits on this, and I would love for you to review it again. And, if they have time or if they don't. But then there are some critique partners who I look for completely new, because there's something new that they can offer. I've never worked with them before.
right.
And they have fresh eyes on it as well. The value of somebody who hasn't read your work before can also be really important.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think also it's just really nice to just sort of expand your horizons sometimes too. It's great to be able to have that way to get to know other authors.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way that's unique to us, right? Nobody else gets to share that except for other
Mm-hmm.
writers. And we know as writers that that's a side of that person that other people don't get to see. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a level of like, camaraderie and an intimacy there that can really build friendships very quickly. And that's lovely too, just in its own right, aside from any, um, benefit that your writing may receive from that relationship. It's just a really nice way to build support and build community and support your other authors. So.
Yeah. Um, so can you speak to, so keeping with the theme of critique partners, so you have worked with an agent and you have worked with editors, and
Yeah.
while it's not necessarily a partnership at that point, it's more of a job. Can you talk about the editing process within that and kind of how you walked through that?
Yeah, sure. I think it differs probably significantly with each agent relationship, and then also with each publishing house, and within the publishing house, each imprint. So, my editing relationship with my agent is to send her my book, and she will write back, usually an email. She might have some in manuscript edits, but they wouldn't be line edits.
Okay.
And that's just not her style. Other agents might do line edits. It really depends on the person. But I would get an email that has some sort of big picture things that she'd want to see changed. Now my editor, and that's Nicole Otto, who is with Imprint at Macmillan, and she's fantastic.
Mhm.
Um, and she edited Dragon Moon, and then she also edited Edge of Strange Hollow. And for her, she would give me back an editorial letter And the editorial letter ranges in size. Mine were usually about 10 pages.
Wow.
I know people that had, 20 to 30 pages. I know people that had 2 or 3 pages. So it varies a lot. But the basic, sort of goal is to provide developmental edits, which are those really big picture story edits, like, this character's not working at all for me, let's kill her off. And or what if you took this whole chunk of the journey that's currently in the middle and you swapped it with the whole part of the journey that's at the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then come up with a new end, right? So those are, big picture edits. But then she also provides, the smaller scale, what do I like about the way this character develops and what needs to change within that character's development? What about your, is the pacing right? So do you have, sort of a beginning, middle, end with an inciting incident towards the beginning and a sort of dark night of the soul heading towards the last third of the book. And so, it would take a few days to process the information from a 10-page letter. And she was always great about providing lots of positive feedback too. So, you spoke to that, how important it is to kind of balance those, just so your critique partner doesn't lose their mind. And so, and then I would just kind of start to wade through it. And I usually broke it down into a more condensed version of the edit, so I would have a better sense of what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And I might work through some problems, and that might involve a couple of conversations with her potentially, to clarify things or to kind of use her as a sounding board for different ways to solve a problem. And then back to drafting, back to doing the work.
Speaking to the positivity in critiquing and in the first readers of a manuscript, I have definitely had critique partners who I know claim to love my work and think it's the most brilliant thing. So people who are like my mom, and who will just say no wrong. And definitely, I feel like my rougher drafts are a lot more sensitive for me to send out to people, because here is this brand new work that I feel so very passionate about. And so I have certain critique partners who are a little bit more gentle with me and who will say nicer things across it. And so those are who I refer to as my first critique partners, because sometimes I just need to hear, yes, this idea is good.
You're on the right track.
Yeah. And know that. So after I get that, it kind of gives me the confidence to send it out to the next round. And these are the people who dig in a little bit more and will say, I don't think this chapter is working here. Here's this cluster. It made no sense to me. I don't know what you're trying to do here. But here's what I really liked about all of these parts. And then I usually have a third tier of people who give me the really tough editing that I don't want to hear, I don't want to participate with, but it takes me sometimes those tiers to get my manuscript to where I really want it to be. And where I feel comfortable sending it to my agent and sending it and saying, I think this is really strong. I think this is something you're going to like. And so how do you manage that? Do you do anything like that to kind of help boost your confidence? Or did you even when you first started?
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. I mean, and part of that is like you get to know those people and again, sort of what they're good at, and intrinsically that so-and-so is going to be way harsher than so-and-so. Right?
Yep.
And so I definitely have done that where I've wanted to kind of buffer my little writer heart and I've sent it to the people, I'm like, okay, what I know I need to know is whether this is resonating at all, right?
Yep.
Is this even a book person thing, right? Is this the thing I want to put my heart into? And I'll send it to somebody who can give me that without the burn it to the ground, intense feedback. but I also have, there have been times when I've been like, no, this is the time for the burn it to the ground, like the intense feedback, because the work needs to happen. And part of that is kind of where you're at as a person in your life right in this moment. And part of it is, what your goal for your book is, and your timeline for your book too. If you've got solid deadlines that are going to keep you from doing that work later on, then you might have to just sort of bite the proverbial bullet and go in for the kill. God.
What? So graphic.
I know, right? But it can feel like that sometimes. I mean, I think when you're facing down a really big edit and you suspect, if not know, you're facing down a big edit, you really do kind of have to gird your loins. Dearie me. You really have to kind of battle armor up, right? To say, I can do this. I can really do this. And having critique partners that are willing to give you positive and negative feedback makes a big difference, regardless of how in-depth the feedback is, right? I think most people need that at some level.
Yeah. So Gabby, if you don't mind, so imagine you are currently interacting with a brand new author. They just finished their manuscript or the second or third draft on their own, and they're looking for a critique partner. So what are some things that you would say to look for in a critique partner? If you could just give like the bulleted points of, this is what I would do.
I mean, I think first and foremost, you want somebody who is willing to critique for you, right? And I think when you're just starting out, that may feel like the biggest hurdle, like just actually getting to other writers who want to read and critique, because it's a time investment. And so I think that initial, like the very first time you're trying to find a critique partner, I think what you're looking for is a willing reader. And you sort of have to navigate as you go, but knowing, right, this may not be a great match. So making the effort, maybe only swapping the first 10 pages, seeing what that feels like, deciding if you are going to write an edit letter, like something that's very formal with some kind of a format to it, which you certainly can do. There are critique partners that do it that way, and sort of model after editorial letters. Or if you're going to just sort of edit as you go in the manuscript, and maybe share an email with your overall thoughts about that person's writing. And I think setting a time limit, I know now that most of the time when I send out something to a critique partner, I would say, I'm trying to get this to my agent by the end of the month, or I'm hoping that I can start editing again in a couple of weeks, or whatever. And so you have sort of a time frame established for that feedback to come to you, because the worst thing in the world is to give somebody feedback and then be waiting for 6 months.
Yeah, deadlines are definitely important, and having the transparency of, we're working in COVID times. My child is going to be doing electronic schooling. I'm staying at home now. I don't have the capacity to take this on. And, ideally in the future, some of that stress will be alleviated, but having the reality of most of us have jobs outside of writing. Most of us have families outside of writing. And, even for us to get the time to write for ourselves and then add the editorial for others, it's really important to set realistic goals and expectations with your critique partner, because,
and I would just say, keep it simple, right? So if you're just starting out, it's different than if you've been doing this for a while, right? But if you're just starting out, start with just the first chapter. If it's a brand new critique partnership, see how that feels, and say, and give each other, check in, like, do you think is a week enough time? Does a week work for you? And then do we need to decide if we want to do chapter 2? Or do we want to just sort of leave it at that and see how we feel, and then maybe later send the whole book if it's working really well? You know, I think those are the sorts of questions, and you have to ask them along the way, but you have to ask them and know that they're sort of going to be there for you to move forward with. And then as you develop those relationships, and maybe this person didn't work out, and so you have to ask another person. And at least for me, what I recall is that just starting out, that first ask is really energetically difficult. You know, just because you're just getting to know these people. And I would add too, Lynn, and that you made me think of this earlier, and then this reminded me, I would not ask family members or friends to be critique partners for you.
Right.
Because you won't get what you need from that, most likely. Right. You know, family members and even current friends, even if they are also writers, I have noticed that often, and this is my own experience, right? When you start with friendship and then tack on the writing, the friendship part kind of absorbs it, and they're more interested in pumping you up than in improving your book. And I don't know that they would necessarily frame it that way, but it's very difficult to get really good critique from people who already love you and care about you.
So I'm only going to challenge that a little bit,
Okay.
because one of my best editors, I actually met at a writing conference as well. It was AWP, and a million years ago. I don't even know when that was. I think it was like my first one. So I met him and his now wife. We became really good friends. We knew we had written, but we definitely became very good friends. I messaged them pretty regularly. And because he is my friend, he is not afraid of hurting my feelings. He's actually the editor who has made me cry the most, because he is not afraid to blatantly be like, this isn't good, do better. And so definitely, and again, it goes back to being selective about who you're involving in your writing. Do you have the people who can challenge you with that, or do you have the people who are going to coddle and comfort you? Because
important.
Because definitely, like, my partner thinks I write the greatest things ever, and so a lot of the times, especially with poetry, I'll be like, hey, I wrote this poem, I like it, and it's just because I need to hear somebody else say, yeah, I think it's good. Does he understand poetry? Not an ounce at all. But he was like, no, this sounds okay. But when I want the real good feedback, I'm looking for the people who are willing to hurt my feelings because it hurts it doesn't hurt my writing because it helps my writing. And they can look at the work as a work of art that needs to be fixed.
And I don't by any means, you know, I think you can become really, really good friends with your critique partners. Absolutely. Sure.
And it happens.
Exhibit A. But I think that's easier to become really good friends with your critique partners. What am I trying to say? It's better to you'll get better critique from those friends who were your critique partners before they were your friends.
Yes, I fully agree with that, for sure.
Rather than the friends who were friends first and then critique partners.
Yeah.
And of course there are exceptions, but that's just my experience.
So as we're starting to kind of try to wrap up, I would wonder, either as the critiquer or the person being critiqued, do you have any regrets or any really big red flags that you would like to voice into the world?
I don't have any regrets. I mean, I think it's really important to know when to say no.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, something you learn with individuals, but also, you know, I wouldn't recommend, you know, reading for 10 people at once, say, because you want to just, you know, find the right person faster. I haven't found that to be a good strategy. You know, it's hard when you really want to find the right people and you need them now. But that doesn't necessarily, you won't necessarily find those people faster by just taking on more all at once. So I would say just, you know, be aware of your own boundaries and how much time you really can dedicate to the process. of critiquing with somebody, believe you'll find those people, because you will. If you continue on, you will find them. Or they will find you. It's not just your job, right? There are other people looking too. I think beyond that, I don't think I have any other thoughts other than the worst possible thing you can do to be either as a critique partner for somebody else, or that somebody can do to you, is that really, really big pushback on somebody's feedback. If someone's given a lot of time and energy to giving you critique, the worst thing to do is to say, what do you mean? You're absolutely wrong. You've got this totally backwards. I don't know why you would ever think that, to sort of come at them.
It's a really good way to lose a critique partner.
It's a really good way to lose a critique partner. And it's just also not a good look.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, critique is hard. It's really difficult. It's hard to receive it, and it's also hard to give it. And so I think that mutual respect has to lead the way in all partnerships.
Yeah. I would definitely, I kind of asked this question because I also wanted to answer it.
Yeah. Good.
So I definitely have a regret and kind of a cautionary tale in that, in my early 20s, I thought I was such a cool writer, and I was like facing all of these traumas and writing all of this great stuff. I wasn't, mind you, I didn't start writing well until my later 20s, but I did a presentation at a high school. And one of the students had said, "Hey, I really like writing too. Can you give me feedback?" And me in my youthful 20s was like, "Yeah, absolutely. This will be so great." And I think at this point, I think, Gabby, I had critiqued for you a couple of times, and I had critiqued for other adults. And there's definitely a sensitivity factor to taking on other projects, especially for people who you have the opportunity to really guide here. And I totally dropped the ball. I edited this girl's work, and it was really, really good. I think she was like 15 or 16, and it was really good for that age bracket. I was really impressed. But I think I edited it to a level that I expected of an adult.
Right.
I don't think I offered enough positivity, and unfortunately, after I set it back, I never heard from her again. And I had walked into it thinking that I was helping someone. And honestly, it's probably one of my biggest regrets. And this is, again, speaking to the clarification of what are you looking for here? And really, we're trying to inspire and encourage each other. And sometimes being able to have those tougher conversations of, I really think this could use some work here and here. And also just making sure that the people who are asking for the critique are really ready to hear it. Because sometimes we're really not at that point, and that's where it can be really hard. And again, in this situation, it's one of my biggest regrets. So if you guys ever find yourself in that situation, give it a lot of thought. Don't just go into it thinking that you're super cool and you're super hard, because this is 10 years later, and this is something that still heavily weighs on me, because I don't know if she continued writing, and I hope to God that she did. And I hope that, I didn't do too much damage, and I really could have, and I just don't know.
I mean, I hear you, and I understand why you have those feelings. And, I think also that it's, none of us are mind readers, right? And we know what we know in the moment where we are. And so that's partly why developing these relationships is a process that happens over time, right? Just like any friendship develops over time, any partnership develops over time. And we lead with that mutual respect, and try and figure out if we are what that person needs to help them grow. And we don't know the answer to that until we know it, which, unfortunately, sometimes that means people's feelings get hurt, but we do the best we can.
Are there any last minute thoughts or points that we haven't covered that you would like to cover?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we covered a lot of stuff, and I think it's pretty cool to be in a little, even though we're online, even though we don't get to be all together in a room and talking about this stuff and answering people's questions. I'm super glad that I found you.
Yeah. Do you have, so this is where I always like to plug, do you have any social media that people should be following for your future works? I know you have a second book coming out. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Edge of Strange Hollow comes out May 18th. It comes out with Macmillan. It's a middle grade fantasy, a kind of twisted fairy tale. And you can learn more about it at my website, which is gkbyrne, BYRNE books.com. And I'm also on Twitter at gkbyrne. And yeah, I hope to see you guys all at the next PNWA.
Yay.
And thank you, Lynn, for inviting me to chat with you about this. It's kind of a cool topic. I don't think enough people sort of give it its fair due.
Agreed. And if you guys would like to reach me, I am on Twitter at Lynne Schmidt, LYNNE SCHMIDT, and on Instagram at Lynne, LYNNE_E_Schmidt. And there's also a Facebook page. It's Lynne with like the E in brackets, so you guys can find me there as well. Hopefully I'll have more work coming soon. I have the 2 books out.
Do check out Lynn's poetry if you get the opportunity, because it's fantastic.
Thank you. But you know, the last bit of feedback that I can give on this feed is just to keep writing, and you will find the critique partners that you were meant to have. I am so grateful to having found Gabby at PNWA in 2011, because there's been so many times over these last couple of years where I've quit writing, and I've just been really upset, or, you know, the rejections and querying and all those things, they really wear on you. And so finding the people who really believe in your work and push it along, you know, I would not be where I am as a writer and even as a human without Gabby's encouragement. So, you know, keep going.
Yep. And there's great community out there. Don't avoid online community building, because there are some fantastic places to meet and exchange writing, both through organizations like PNWA, SCBWI, the Write On Con conference. You know, there's lots of places that you can go to meet and exchange writing.
NaPoWriMo is one, National Novel Writing Month, which is in November. It's right around the corner. That's an excellent way to meet people as well, or even just encourage each other. You don't even have to swap manuscripts.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Twitter also. There's tons and tons and tons of authors on Twitter. And it's a great way, you know, you can go to places like the MG chat or the YA chats to learn more about the genre, to learn more about what authors are talking about and what they're doing, what is happening in publishing, and to sort of get feedback on where to go to learn how to query and where to go to do this. You know, there's a lot of people out there talking about writing and the process, and that can be very helpful when you're getting started.
Definitely. So yeah,
are we there?
I think we're there. I don't know if there will be contact information in case anybody has any questions, but either way, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you found some valuable information in here. And I'll leave it to Gabby to sign off fully.
Yep, and thanks to PNWA for having us. All right.